Hey guys, Rob Dabney here with ADV Pulse, and we're here in South Africa for the press launch of the 2023 Norden 901 Expedition. So this is the up-spec'd version of the Norden 901 with higher quality suspension and an array of new touring amenities. It's still the same 889cc parallel twin as before with 105 horsepower. It's got 21-inch front wheel and 18-inch in the rear. It's also got a 5-gallon tank. There are some new changes though, starting with the windscreen, which is much taller, so it's gonna block a lot more wind. It's got a heated seat for the pilot, not the passenger. It's also got the new skid plate that's 4 millimeters thick and has a lot more coverage. The biggest change though is the suspension. Now this has a much higher spec suspension. It's the same Explorer suspension that you get on the KTM 890R, although it does have some suspension settings that are unique to this bike. It's a little bit more plush than the 890R. It's designed to be more comfortable for travel. So now you've got an upgraded suspension that is on par with the 890R in terms of its componentry and in terms of the bump absorption, just a little bit softer, a little bit tuned more for the travel side of things. In addition, you get the center stand now, and the Explorer mode for the electronics package is now included as standard equipment. It's also got the Bluetooth dongle that allows you to hook up your phone to the TFT, and of course the bag, which are another thing that they've added. You've got these soft bags that come with the bike and the rack. So a lot of new things added to this bike to create a more well-rounded, more all-terrain vehicle for both travel and off-road. The ergos are gonna be similar to the old Norden, same handlebar, similar seat, just has a new cover on it. But in terms of the comfort on this bike, it's not too far of a reach to the bars, they're not too high. The seat height's perfectly placed for long distance riding. And you've got not too much of a knee bend, it's not too cramped. They've increased the suspension height by roughly an inch. So basically you can expect to have to step up a little bit higher to get on this bike, but still manageable for someone in the 5'8", 5'9" range. Big improvement in the wind protection on this bike now that you've got this very tall windscreen. They've been putting it through the wind tunnel testing, and they've come up with this unique design, and you can basically be standing up and it'll block the wind against your chest and everything like that. You've got the heated grips, which are standard now. We did go down to the coast and it was pretty foggy down there by the ocean, and I did try out the heated grips and the heated seat, and it was really nice. They are very warm, and I couldn't handle the high setting. I had to turn it down to low. We did a lot of highway miles on the bike. You've got the same smooth 890cc motor that it had before, plenty of power for passing. It doesn't have that hyper speed like you would get with the 1200cc class, where it just wants to pull your arms off, but it's got a good exciting motor with a lot of pep. It's just one of those bikes that it's designed to just go the miles. When the road turns twisty, you can really lean it over, can go out there and ride with the fast guys. I did notice that now with the new center stand, that if you're really getting it over far and if you're kind of on an off camber turn or something like that, you can start to scrape the center stand once in a while. It's also taller with this new suspension, so you do notice a bit more dive and squat when you're braking hard into turns and accelerating out. So if you're trying to ride it like a sport bike and that's your thing, then maybe you want to go for the standard Norden because it's got a little bit better firmness for that kind of riding. But it does a lot better than you'd expect a bike like this with 9.5 inches of suspension travel to do on a twisty road. So the brakes are another high point on this bike. It works great on the street. Works fantastic off-road, very powerful. You could always just modulate the brakes perfectly, and on the turns it has a lot of flexibility in how hard you can ride it, and it's got a little safety net there, I would say, to keep you on the road. So in terms of ride mode, you've got the street mode, Explorer mode, rain mode, and you've also got off-road mode. They're pretty self-explanatory except for the Explorer mode. That gives you the rally power map, which is a really sharp, sensitive, fast throttle response. And that's like, if you're going into sport bike mode and you want to lift the front wheel up, it just gives you all the power quickly and immediately. So also with the Explorer mode, you can adjust the traction control to your liking. If you like to spin the tires a little bit on the street, you can get that thing spun out around turns if you turn it all the way off, or you can bump it up to 2 or 3, and that way you know that if you're coming out of a turn too hot, it will modulate the power just enough to keep traction. Overall, plenty of great capability as a highway bike with this nice windscreen and all the nice touring amenities and great brakes, great handling. Just a little drawback in terms of a little bit more of an off-road suspension. In terms of off-road, previously with the old Norden, just didn't have as much suspension travel as it needed for hardcore off-road, and it would bottom out a little bit too soon. This one is the full KTM 890R suspension in terms of the mechanical parts. It's just a little bit softer in terms of the tuning. But right away I noticed on the first dirt road, we were going over these big, huge potholes, and there was a bunch of washboard type roads. And maybe with the old Norden where you would be standing up over things like that, with this I could just kind of ride sitting down over it and let the suspension do the work and just kind of relax. So very smooth, and one of the most plush suspensions I've ridden on any adventure bike. I really enjoyed it just for the fact that it's the kind of suspension where by the end of the day, you're just feeling it didn't kick your butt all day, and it got you through all the rough stuff without having to wince and take the punishment. So those little things make a lot of difference on a long trip like that. When the bumps got bigger, you know, that's where the suspension is really going to make a big difference as well. This bike has much more hold up, much more bottom resistance than the old Norden. It's a significantly better suspension. And you notice it as soon as you start to jump it, do drop offs, or any kind of big giant ruts that you go through too fast. It's got great hold up. When it does bottom, it now has a much plusher stop than before, where before it would thunk the fork as soon as you hit something it didn't like. This one, it's more of a soft, progressive bottoming, and it doesn't really feel like a bottoming out as much as it did before. And that's just the high quality components that these Explorer suspensions have. So I did bottom it out a few times when I was riding really hard, but I just cranked up the preload because the stock preload settings are really gonna be more for a guy who's 180 pounds. I'm 210 on a good day. So we cranked it up, and after that, it totally changed it. It made it even better. And it was just so much more lively, so much more flowy. And even though it is a little bit softer than the 890s settings, you could do a lot more with the bike than you could before. The only thing that I did notice is that the center stand started to scrape on rocks. So it actually starts to hit the center stand before the rear suspension bottoms out. But I never touched the front settings at all, and I never bottomed out the front the whole time. So, you know, we'll have to get it out on more technical terrain when we get a chance to test this back home. But so far, the improvement is significant. As far as the handling, it's a fairly large adventure bike. There's no getting around that, but it does great for its size. The handling, it's very precise. You can pick a line and it sticks to it. Rarely did I ever get knocked off line or, you know, feel like I was getting a lot of oversteer. It is a little bit bigger feeling than the standard Norden just because of the larger windscreen and just a little bit more mass with these bags on there. But if you're gonna buy the standard Norden, you're gonna throw bags on it anyway. So there's a little extra weight with this bike. It's got 22 pounds roughly additional weight. It felt like the old Norden did with the luggage on it. The taller suspension also does make it feel a little bit bigger just because you're higher off the ground, but that just gives you so many more advantages anyway. As far as the ergos for riding off-road, it's a little bit hard to get your weight forward when you're sitting. It's sort of a longer tank, so it likes to be ridden standing up better than sitting, but sitting's still pretty good. The bars feel tad low for a guy my height. I would probably maybe put some 1/2-inch risers or something like that, maybe a taller bar on it, and it would feel nicer. The pegs are grippy, they're fairly large, so you can get away with not going with an aftermarket peg. The ergos are putting you in a dirt bike position where you can get your chin over the bars. The only thing that throws you off a little bit is this tall windscreen, which I hit my chin on a couple times when I was pushing hard, just because it's just so in your face. You know, personally, I might want a shorter windscreen. I like the old Norden windscreen a little bit better, but that's only if you're like really boogieing when you start to get into this area. The ride mode that I use most of the time with this bike is just standard off-road mode. It just does a good job. It has a fair amount of traction control, and there's also a soft throttle response. The power just feels a little bit detuned, so it works great off-road. But if you get into one of those really fun sections where you know the hill climb and you know there's going to be a jump, you know, you throw that thing into the rally mode for the Explorer mode with the rally throttle response, and the thing just ripped. You're gonna get a little bit sloppy, you're gonna be sliding it out, but it's a lot of fun. You'll probably be faster if you just use off-road mode because the traction control is so precise that it's probably better than your wrist. It's better than mine for sure. So if I was gonna race it, I'd probably just put it in off-road mode and be good. Only time when you really need to turn the traction control off is if you get in deep sand or really loose rocks or pebbles. Otherwise, it's so good that you never need to. So as far as the brakes, again, I mentioned before, they have a lot of great feel, and that translates to off-road as well. As soon as you get in soft sand, soft, loose dirt, you can just modulate the brakes on this bike very subtly, and it's very hard to lock it up. You have two different braking modes on this bike: standard ABS for the street, which is front and rear, and then you have the off-road ABS, which makes the front wheel off-road sensitive and then turns the rear wheel off. So in that mode, it works great unless you're going down a cliff or something like that. Would you ever really think, oh man, I don't want to have this ABS on? It's really good, but you don't have that option to turn it off completely. You cannot turn both the front and wheel off at the same time. It's only rear wheel off and then off-road sensitive front for the off-road ABS mode. In terms of durability of the bike, over the last couple of days, I saw the bike get dropped a fair amount. None of the handguards broke. They held up really well. This skid plate is pretty massive and thick, and it covers everything that you would need to protect. So I think they did a great job with that. The only thing that's a little bit questionable has been these bags. Some of the stitching has been coming apart, but we hear they're pre-production design, and some of the stitching wasn't double stitched, so they're going to be working on improving that. The racks seem to be pretty tough, but on one of the bikes, some bolts came loose and the bar came off, but it still, you know, held on tight. It was just the rear bar, so it wasn't a big deal. But that's pretty much all the things that I've seen in terms of issues during the ride. A couple people did complain about some head shake when they got into really loose technical terrain. I never had that problem, but definitely a couple people did. I'd assume that that's probably just some suspension tuning, some adjustments that would need to be made to make that go away, but just something to mention. The other thing that I also heard some complaints about were the electronics with the Explorer mode. Sometimes people were setting the ABS to off-road, and then if they went into a street mode after that and then try to switch back, it would automatically switch the ABS into on-road ABS. I don't know if it's a gremlin or if that's just the way it's supposed to be designed to do that, but that was one of the little annoyances that some people were complaining about. I didn't experience it in the beginning, but all of a sudden I started to have that problem too. And if you're switching back and forth between modes, you just have to kind of keep an eye on it and make sure that with the Explorer mode, you reset it to off-road ABS if that's the setting that you want it to have. I think overall what you're getting with this bike now is a plusher, more luxurious KTM 890R. You've got the higher spec suspension now, so it's very capable, but just a little bit softer, more easy to live with on a long ride. Whereas if you like to ride your bike like your adventure bike like a dirt bike, and you're doing racing style riding and really hardcore stuff all the time, that's probably when you're gonna wanna gravitate more towards the 890R. But I think a lot of people love the aesthetics of this bike, and you get all the luxury up-spec equipment with it as well. Plus now you've got a high quality suspension. So I think that that is one of the things that really stands out about this bike and why you'd go for this versus an 890R. I also like that they put this package together for $1,300. That's, you know, $1,300 is compared to the standard Nordens. So you've got the windscreen, the new skid plate, the bags, the racks, Explorer mode, and the Rally power map, which is now included standard, and of course the suspension. If you add all that stuff up, it's thousands of dollars. So for $1,300, I think it's a great value. So if you're looking at the standard Norden and you're thinking of doing a lot of the aftermarket upgrades and things like that, then going straight to this bike, you're gonna get a lot of those things straight out of the box. For me personally, this bike is the kind of bike I'd love to ride on a daily basis for my adventures. Before, it was just lacking a little bit for the harder, more aggressive riding that I like to do. The only thing I'd probably change personally is I think the windscreen's great. If you like to go touring and, you know, long distances, then that big tall windscreen is great, but I prefer to have something a little bit shorter, just that doesn't get in the way when you're off-road. The center stand also was a little bit of a letdown for me, just because I felt it bottoming out more when You know, I still wasn't even bottoming out the suspension yet, but I could hear it, rocks hitting the center stand. So I'd rather just walk around with a trail stand and put that in my tool bag and just have the extra ground clearance. So for me, those are things that I'd change, but for other people, those are important things to be able to put the bike flat, load the bike with all the luggage and everything like that. It's really nice to have a center stand for maintenance and many other things. And of course, wind protection is an important thing, but that'd be the only changes I'd make, and I'd put this in my garage. MSRP on this bike in the United States is $15,799. If you want more information on the bike, we're gonna have a full review in written form at advpulse.com. Thanks for watching, and we really appreciate it if you like and subscribe, and let us know if you have any questions in the comments.